Hi, everyone. Rich Berliner here from Fifth Gen Media, the owners of the In-Building Wireless Association. And I'm really honored to be here with Alex King from Airtower today. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Rich, and thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And Alex, you're an interesting example of one of the people in the in-building wireless space because you're not a natural guy like an old fellow like me that's been around this whole thing for a very long time. So you have a unique perspective on things. I think that's a bit different. So tell us a little bit about Air Tower and your background and play to what I was saying about you coming from a little bit different area than most of the people in this space.
Well, I appreciate you calling me young. My kids would disagree with you at that point, but
Well, compared to
yeah.
me, anyway, Alex.
Um, yeah, no, my background has historically been in consulting. So the benefit of coming from consulting, specifically utilities and then telecommunications consulting, is I got to see a lot of different businesses in a very short period of time. So I got my start in 2006 and really kind of started off doing a lot of regression analysis and for public rate making and for the DOJ and for PUCs and the like, and then shifted over after some work with the FCC and did a lot more on telecom. And I've really spent the majority of my career in telecommunications helping companies build out data centers and fiber and invest in those assets and really spending a ton of time on digital infrastructure. And it's been incredible just to see how it's transformed and how it's changed and really like the growth of bandwidth over that period of time and how important your cell phone has become in your life is just incredible. So it's been a fun way to see a lot of different vectors in the industry, and I think that's given me a really unique ability to take any different business or problem within a business and apply it using a variety of different analogs.
Right. So now you've kind of landed in the in-building wireless space with Air Tower, and Air Tower has taken a little bit of a different spin on things from what I understand. And so I assume a good portion of that comes from your background and the consulting things that you've had experience with. So tell us a little bit about that different take, what you're focused on, and what Air Tower's sort of mission is here.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I can take a ton of credit for this. You know, Manny DeReja, who founded the company, is instrumental in terms of like dictating how this company has ultimately come to be, and obviously our financial sponsors on the Dutch Infrastructure Fund. The niche that we really fill, because there's a lot of like integrators out there that'll just go out and build the system for you. Sometimes a little bit fly by night, and sometimes it's really high quality. And then there's another kind of sector of the this market, which is they kind of package deals together, and they would used to try to go get carrier funding and financing for it to try to make this really, really cost efficient in terms of deploying a cellular network. Is we've tried to bridge that gap. We're in an interesting part of time or timing, I should say, in history where carriers have really stopped funding a lot of these types of builds as they pull back on a lot of their 5G, like in building initiatives, at least at scale, right? They're still doing it in pockets. And we come in and we take over what the traditional integrator approach was, where we can build you a public safety system, or we can build you a Wi-Fi system, or we can build you a cellular network. But then we are able to actually own and operate those things over 10, 15, 20 years. And the beauty of what we've done is we've never taken carrier funding. We've never taken carrier financing. We take a very strict venue perspective such that we are going to be advocating on your behalf to build you the best network that you possibly want. There's a lot of buildings out there that have a DAS system in them, and there's only one carrier, right? You were sold a bill of goods. We'll get everybody on,
Yeah,
but
well,
lo and
don't worry,
behold,
we'll get everybody.
yeah, lo and behold, nobody joined. And so, and there's a lot of marketing agreements where, again, nobody joined. And so we can come in with a very robust balance sheet, help finance these deals over the course of 15 or 20 years, and get you a network that is carrier grade, robust. And we obviously have the whole life cycle of a building, right? When you're putting the public safety system in at the very get-go, all the way to when you're upgrading your Wi-Fi network. We can handle all of that.
That's great. So you brought up the part about carrier funding, which is obviously an interesting aspect of this whole thing. So thank you, by the way. You were a sponsor at our event in Plano, Texas,
A
a few
pleasure.
months
Yeah.
back. And one of the things I did that was kind of prearranged for us was the carrier panel. And the carrier panel consisted of a number of people from the carriers saying the following: we're not paying anymore. So I have not decided, excuse me, I've decided not to do a carrier panel for our next event, which is in Fort Lauderdale in 4 weeks. In Fort Lauderdale, we've decided not to put a carrier panel together because I really don't think we need to hear them come in and say, "Hey, we're not paying for this again."
Right.
So now what we've kind of done is moved forward to say, okay, we get that as an industry, we understand that, and I think real estate people by and large now understand that too. And well, what are the alternatives? So if the carrier's not putting up the money and you don't want to put up the money, what are the alternatives for that? And it's companies like Airtower that fill that space. So one of the interesting things that we're doing here in Fort Lauderdale is we've got Dr. Joe Bacuzzi from NVIDIA speaking. And the
Okay.
reason that this, more than anything, it's luck that he was kind enough to decide to be with us. But what he's going to be talking about plays nicely into what you're talking about, this long-term approach, because the theme of the whole event is robust connectivity is absolutely necessary for you to maximize your AI investment. And so if you don't have the right connectivity infrastructure in your building, you're going to be unhappy with what you're trying to do with your AI inside that building. And so that's cool. And he's starting to, we did a prep the other day, and I'm kind of a little bit mind blown from the things he's going to be discussing at the event about what NVIDIA. Now, by the way, he's the head of 5G, 6G for NVIDIA. We laughed about this at the beginning. Who the hell knew NVIDIA had a 5G, 6G practice inside? I
Yeah.
didn't. I don't know if you did, but it takes most people by surprise that NVIDIA cares about 5G and 6G for the future, but they do. And so there's really going to be an interesting twist of what he's talking about that I think everybody from real estate guys and all the in building folks that are out there listening to the event are going to want to hear. So that's an interesting twist. How do you view all the work that you're doing? And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you focus a lot on hospitals and healthcare. Is that accurate?
It is accurate, but before we go there, I think it is worth talking about NVIDIA a little bit because they've really been at the forefront of connectivity for a while now. Like, I don't know if you remember when they bought Mellanox a while back, and everybody was like, why are they buying a data center, effectively an Ethernet competitor? And they realized that the they are turning these giant data centers into AI machines, and that the latency between all of the various systems and all of the various GPU clusters matters immensely when you're training these models. And it's not just when what they've, I think he's going to talk about is it's not just on the actual, the data center side of things as well. It's when you build these inference models, which is where we're at right now, and you start to deploy those on the edge, the connectivity is mattering, and the latency specifically matters quite a bit there because any delay in between when you ask Gemini for an answer and you get a 5-second delay before the response back, it will significantly impact your usage of whatever model it is. Like, I don't know if you remember studies, that they did 10, 15 years ago around e-commerce, where like if you had to wait an extra 10 milliseconds or 30 milliseconds for your page to load, there was an enormous drop off in actual
Yeah.
people who were buying from their shopping cart. So people put a ton of effort and energy into making it as low latency as possible to make sure that you stayed around and actually purchased the item, whatever good was in your shopping cart. So yeah, they've definitely been at the forefront for a while.
Well, you've said a couple of things that show me how smart a guy you really are, because you covered a couple of topics that Joe is going to cover at the event. And one of them is the word edge. And
Yep.
so I think what you're going to see is you remember back a little way in the telecom space that the edge was now going to be at every cell site. We were going to put a server there, and that's where the edge was going to lie. And I think, and I don't know this for a fact, but I think that the game, and you mentioned the purchase of Mellanox. I think the game that's going to really be happening going forward is that the edge becomes that data center with very, very low latency. And then that's the way that we move forward in this. And so I think he's going to cover the discussion of the edge and all of those things, latency and how that is from the NVIDIA, where he sits at NVIDIA and where they think of this whole thing. So it's going to be a fascinating talk. But you kind of covered that is the point that I think in our space that we're going to be seeing more talk about the new edge, and I think that's interesting. So the carriers are not paying. We are working on now longer term agreements with real estate owners and how this all plays out so that they can figure out how to maximize their AI investment. Then we're going to be talking about reducing latency using techniques like what NVIDIA is doing. And then
Yep.
I think the very much the important aspect to this is also going to be what do the real estate people think they need? What do the real estate people really need? And how is that going to get paid for? And how are they going to look at it from an amortization standpoint over the course of their journey towards AI? And I think that's kind of what people are going to see at this event. And by the way, as a return sponsor here, I first of all want to thank you. But the fact is that I think some of these people, some people in our industry don't think that you can really go to conferences and come away with very much. And I think that's what we're really driving towards here at this is having guys like NVIDIA, companies like NVIDIA, guys like Joe Bacuzzi, people like you come to this and having something really important to say. So I tip my hat to you. Where else do you think you want to go with this from your standpoint at Airtower?
Yeah, well, I think I mean, you've brought up a lot there. It's a ton to unpack. I think what people really need to understand is this is just almost like a historical inevitability, right? Where if you looked back in the 70s, everything was mainframe driven, right? Everything was done on a mainframe. And eventually you got to a point where most of your uh, compute was actually done on the edge, on your desktop, on your laptop, on your phone. We're actually, 10, 15 years ago, we started to see the shift back to the cloud, right? And now it's a hybrid, right? You've got a bunch of stuff that sits in the cloud, huge models, large storage, but you still do a massive amount on your local edge device. Same thing is true with content distribution, right? Like if you think about the early 90s where people were calling the WWW the worldwide wait, right? We had to wait until what, 97, 98 when Akamai came, they went public, and all of a sudden content distribution nodes became a thing. And now all of a sudden you say, okay, we went from a monolithic like service, right? Where it's like my content is stored in one location to now I'm storing it in 1,000 locations and they're probably up to, 15, 20,000 different edge nodes, right? Across the world where I can serve my content dynamically and I can get that because the latency matters to the end user. Like you found out that like if not only from a bandwidth cost perspective, but from a user engagement perspective, it is worth having that content duplicated, triplicated everywhere such that people could get access to it. And then you could just be smart about like algorithmically pulling that content or distributing that content and how you do that. And that's the smarts behind Akamai, right? That same thing is going to happen with AI. Right now, we have these huge models that are being developed in effectively the cloud, these hyperscale data centers, right? Which are, you know, 50, 100, 200 megawatts of power, but eventually, you need these inference models to make their way to more local edges, right? And that's when they're going to get put into what's used to be known as carrier hotels or edge colocation, like if you're familiar with the company Edge Connects, or you brought up the tower colocation model that Vapor.io was creating. I don't know if that they went anywhere with that, but you're right. Like there is going to be this distribution, and you may even get to the point where you're going to put one of these edge nodes in your building, right? And the thing that's going to tie all of them together is you're going to need connectivity for sure. You need fiber that's running to all of those, potentially what's known, like I don't know if you remember the terminology, a cloud on-ramp. People were
Yeah.
basically doing direct connects or cross connects between their colocation or their building to the AWS facility so that you didn't have to ride over the public internet and have to ride over, with the bandwidth costs and with the latency implications of that, you actually needed that direct connection because the performance of your application, the performance of your workload mattered. And I think that only gets more important with AI if you're interacting with it like a large language model where I'm actually talking to it, right? Doing translation in real time or trying to actually have a live interaction with this model. It has to be at the edge or some combination, the hybrid, right? Where it's at the edge or somewhere in between the edge and that hyperscale data center.
Right. And that I think that's where the NVIDIA piece falls into here. And I know Joe is going to talk a great deal about that. It's where is that edge and how do you make it closer to me, whether it's physically closer or it's closer from a latency standpoint. And I think that's where, again, I'm not nearly as up on you as to what NVIDIA's game was up till this point. And so this is all kind of unpeeling like an onion for me. But the fact of the matter is that it's a very important thing for real estate owners and just people in general in the business community to understand this. And so that's why I think this is such a key conference that people should attend. But the other important thing I think really is if landlords in general look at this and say, "Hey, it's not my problem. It's my tenant's issue. Don't bother me with it," which I hear a fair amount. The new mentality I think is going to be, wait a second, it is your issue because you got to run your building too, and you're working on smart building techniques, and you're working on some tenants that do want you to own and manage this for them. And there's a lot of ramifications now. So I think you've covered a lot of stuff that necessarily other people aren't always aware of. But I think these terminologies, the cloud, the edge, and those sorts of things, latency, are going to be very important topics that anybody who sits in a boardroom, sits in a meeting with their boss, and they say, "Well, what are we doing about this?" And if everybody goes, "I don't know, that's not my," it's going to be there in their lap at some point in time very soon. So, I think you've got a good handle on it. So, what else do you see coming down the pike in general from where you sit? Is there anything of note that you'd like to cover when we do? You are going to be on a panel at the event. Is there anything that you see that you really do want to cover now or get people's interest in for your panel speech?
Well, I think you actually hit on it, which is so many building owners try to pass this off on the tenant. And we saw this 20 years ago with the rise of fiber as well, where they're like, oh, I don't need to worry about internet connectivity because I'm worried about space and power and making sure you have water and your basic utilities. And then fiber infrastructure became another utility. And the buildings that didn't have dual pathways into their building, that didn't have access to 4 or 5 different carriers, were getting penalized in the market. And a lot of those buildings are sitting quite empty right now in the post-COVID environment, right? The same thing is true for your DAS infrastructure. You need to be thinking about, and it's not just cellular DAS, but it's all of your wireless infrastructure and how that comes into the building and how you're going to route it through the building. Are your interducts thick enough? Like I was with a building 2 days ago, and the interduct that they're actually building for the DAS system is only 3/4 inch. You're like, you can't fit a lot of coax through that. And so you're some of these design implications you got to think about when you're actually putting your building up because you're not planning for now. You're planning for when AI is an inevitability in 20 years.
Yeah,
And you got to think about that building because you don't want to have to retrofit everything in 20 years, right?
yeah.
So it's really taking an appropriate long-term view of like where does AI go and where does connectivity go within your building and how does it all fit together today?
Right. However much conduit or space you think you need for connectivity now,
Right.
think of you need more. You
Yeah.
know,
And
there's no
if you're
doubt.
building multiple buildings, like connect them, right? I was dealing with a campus where they didn't actually interconnect any of their buildings with conduit.
That's crazy.
You're like, this was built 20 years, like 15 years ago. It's not crazy to think you're going to have to connect them at some point in time.
Right. But think back to just, all the stuff that's being talked about 25 years ago when all the companies had dark fiber and then went through bankruptcy because, all this dark fiber, it's of no value. And now, that stuff is like gold, like
Zayo bought them all
absolute
up and made a
communications
fortune.
gold. Yeah. So anyway, Alex, thank you so much for not only being our sponsor, but being on our podcast today. I look forward to hearing what you have to say in Fort Lauderdale on February 10th. We've got Dr. Bacuzzi from NVIDIA. We've now got Motorola going to be on there. We're bringing in a bunch of AHJs, authorities having jurisdiction from the South Florida area, including a fellow named Jose DeZayas from Broward County,
Oh,
and a
great.
number of other really interesting people. Unfortunately or fortunately, those of you who are coming to hear the carriers coming and telling us that they don't pay for this anymore, you may be disappointed because we're just not going to have a lot of that at this event. But I'm sure there will be plenty of other interesting information to fill the time. And so I look forward to seeing everybody who's listening in Fort Lauderdale, Downtown Event Center on February 10th. Go to the In-Building Wireless Association to register. And I look forward to seeing you, Alex, and everyone else at the event on February 10th. Thanks again
Sounds
for
good.
being with me. Take care. Bye now. This is Rich Berliner from Fifth Gen Media and the In-Building Wireless Association saying thanks for watching.